Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting. We're going to continue our lecture today talking about ecology. Specifically today we're talking about carrying capacity. Now what is carrying capacity? This is basically the amount of organisms that an ecosystem can handle. So let's go ahead and get the ball rolling and see what we're talking about today. Okay, so carrying capacity, what is this? In any ecosystem, the growth and survival of organisms depend on the physical conditions and on the resources available to the organism. In an ecosystem, there's something called competition, and competition is the struggle for resources among organisms. And a lot of the times what they're fighting over are things known as limiting factors. A limiting factor is any factor in an environment that limits the size of the population. So this could be the amount of food, the availability of space, the water ability. An ecosystem can only support a certain amount of individuals, and the amount of individuals that it can support mostly depends on its limiting factors, and all of these things coming together make something known as a carrying capacity. So the carrying capacity is the amount of organisms that an ecosystem can support, and it can support more organisms when its limiting factors are higher. So if an ecosystem has a lot of food and water, its carrying capacity is going to be higher than in an ecosystem that doesn't have much food and water, because those organisms wouldn't be able to find the resources that they need. Okay? So to talk about carrying capacity in a little bit more detail here, carrying capacity is the number of organisms that an ecosystem can support. The carrying capacity for an area is determined by its limiting factors. A population may only continue to grow until it has reached its carrying capacity. So I wanted to talk about these carrying capacities and how a population might reach that carrying capacity and what happens when they hit that level. Okay, so the first one I wanted to talk about, if you look at this graph, this is known as a logistic or an S-shaped curve. And if you look at this growth curve here, it kind of has an S shape. If you were to stretch that S out a lot, you could see that it kind of has an S shape to it. So we call this a logistic curve. Okay, what's going on here is that on the y-axis running up and down, that's the population. So that's the amount of individuals in a population. On the x-axis over there is time. So we're reading this from left to right, and as we go further into the right, we're getting further into the future, right? Okay, if you look along in the middle of this graph, you'll see that red line, and it's labeled as the carrying capacity. So what's going on here is that this is the theoretical amount of individuals that this population could support. Let's kind of read over this information on the right and see what's going on here. So remember that carrying capacity is the amount of organisms within a region that the environment can support and be sustainable. Okay, stable equilibrium is met when the population aligns with the carrying capacity line. So you can see that at the bottom we're kind of having some slow growth along that green line. As the population gets higher, the reproduction rate is going to increase, so we're having a faster growth, and then as we get closer to that red line, the growth starts to slow down a little bit. Okay, the slow growth occurs when the natality, or the birth rate, is slightly higher than the mortality, or the death rate. For faster growth, the natality is drastically higher than the mortality. So when we're reproducing more than people are dying, we're growing fast. When the growth rate and the death rate are similar, we're not growing as quickly there. The S-shaped logistic curve is formed when the growth rate decreases as carrying capacity is approached by the population. So as we're getting closer to this red line here, you can see that the growth rate starts to slow down a little bit. What's going on is that, remember that the carrying capacity, this is the amount of individuals that this population can support. So as we're getting closer to this, the birth rate starts to go down. Maybe it's harder for the individuals in this population to find mates, and so that would make the birth rate go down a little bit. Eventually we get to this level, this stable equilibrium, where the amount of people in the population is pretty close to the amount of population that the environment can support. So right here, when we're at this stable equilibrium, all of these individuals are going to have enough food and water to survive, and the death rate and the birth rate are going to be very close together. And so we'll just kind of stay right here in this equilibrium, okay? Now let's compare that to a situation when the population grows very, very quickly and starts to go outside of the carrying capacity here. Okay, so look at this graph. This is a little bit different. This is an exponential growth. And what's happening here, this green line at the bottom, you can see that it starts to bow out very greatly. It starts to grow very quickly. The population really has a boom here, and we start to have a large population starts to grow here at once. So same thing, this is talking about a carrying capacity. This is what happens in an exponential situation. So when the population starts to grow very quickly instead of kind of slowly in that S-shaped curve. So let's read over this. So remember, carrying capacity is the amount of organisms within the region that the environment can support and be sustainable. Okay, overshoot occurs when the population growth exceeds the carrying capacity, and this is going to lead to a die-off situation when the individuals in the populations can't be supported. So right here where this little green line starts to move over the red line here, this is called overshoot. What's happening is there are too many individuals in this population for the environment to support. What that means is up here in this little part above the red line, there's individuals here who aren't getting the food that they need, aren't getting the water they need, don't have a habitat or a place to live. When that happens, those individuals that can't find the resources that they need, they're not going to make it. And that is going to drive our population down below the carrying capacity. We have a die-off situation where those individuals that can't find the resources start to die off. And that's going to draw our green line below the carrying capacity again. Because this is an exponential shaped curve, what that means, this could be a type of animal that reproduces very quickly. So maybe it's rabbits or mice or something like that, where they reproduce very, very quickly. And so we go below that carrying capacity again, but then everyone has what they need now, and so they start to reproduce really quickly, and then the same thing happens. When this happens, because we keep having an overshoot and a die-off, during these overshoot periods, all the resources, the food gets eaten almost to its minimum. The water is drunk until there's almost none left. And so what's happening is every time we go over the carrying capacity line, it's actually degrading the overall amount of individuals that the ecosystem can support. So you can see here we go over the red line a little bit, we go over the red line a little bit. We're eating all of our food, we're drinking all of our water, and that is driving down the carrying capacity a little bit. Eventually this population will find a healthy medium, but it'll do a lot of dipping below the line and then overshooting the line, okay? So this is an exponential shaped curve. This is when we reproduce very, very quickly, and sometimes we have too many individuals that the environment can't support. So those are the two types of growth patterns that you might see, either the logistic or the exponential here on this graph. Your teacher has some other work for you to do, so make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.